Welcome, Special Olympics family. You are in for a treat today. Today, Mark Musso, Ralph Biele, and myself are going to discuss the 27 and a half years of history of Special Olympics Missouri. I hope you enjoy this conversation. It starts from the beginning of when Mark Musso came to Special Olympics Missouri back in 1991, and then we'll talk about through the years of how it ended when he left us on March 31st of 2019. Sit back, listen, watch, and enjoy. Look forward to you remembering these great memories.
When we went through the hiring practice back in 1991, the first amazing thing was we had about 470 some applications. So going through all those, but we came to Mark, and I was just really struck with the idea that Mark Musso was maybe a good applicant. He had a good record in Minnesota. He knew about the program, and when it boiled down to making a decision, Mark Musso was the one we hired. Again, I think Mark was a good choice because of his background. He knew Special Olympics, and I think it's always been important to me when I'm talking to people that I feel if they can see the big picture, that's important. And I thought Mark could see the big picture. When we talked about some of the things in Missouri that was happening and was going to happen, Mark seemed that he was up to the task.
Mark?
Well, what I most remember is all the lies that they told me about how much money they had in the bank, how many athletes they had, the fact the budget didn't add up. They advertised his salary in the paper. They got 443 applicants. And then when they offered me the job significantly lower than what it said in the paper. That's what I most remember about the hiring practice back in those days.
However, but it worked. He came, so it wasn't too bad.
Well, had I not been wanting to move to Missouri, it might not have worked, and that's why I said I'd stay 3 years, because I didn't know if I was going to like it or not.
Well, I knew you'd like it because it's such a great deal that we gave you.
Ralph,
I could talk all day on the challenges that Mark had as the new CEO. I felt that we needed to have a restructure. There was no doubt that the way things were, it just wasn't working. We didn't have a budget that was meeting. We had a bank account that couldn't hardly meet the payroll. We had 16 or 18 areas around the state with volunteers where really Mark could not say, I want everybody in one location at one time, because these people all had jobs. And so I pretty well had a plan I put together that I thought would work. But I needed somebody that could implement that plan. And when I told Mark, we sat down and we talked about it, he said, they've tried this in Oregon and in Wisconsin, and it didn't work. And I said, well, I know it didn't work, but I said, it didn't work because they didn't have Mark Musso and Ralph Biele. I said, this is going to work, but Mark, it's not going to be easy. And, to tribute to him, he picked up the ball and ran with my plan. But he tweaked the plan, and he made my plan a good plan. And 27 and a half years later, look what we're sitting in. That's what happened.
Well, I think, as Colonel Biele said, it was a dramatic change. First of all, you hired somebody from another state, which is something that you said you wanted to do. You didn't want to hire anybody within the state because you wanted a whole new way of doing business. You said you wanted to get rid of all those checking accounts and go to one checking account. I remember as we went around to all those town meetings, we did town meetings in all 18 areas. Every single area we went to town meetings. And I remember vividly thinking how pleased I was that you were carrying a weapon in each of those. And I always tried to remind you, please come in uniform. Please come in uniform. I think it'll be a lot better. And I can remember some of them where they went so poorly that I said to you, I leaned over and said to you, I'm just about out of here. And you said to me, I'm right behind you. But I think what I most remember is how everybody disagreed with what we wanted to do and didn't see the long-term, how it could be better. And I think the single smartest thing we did is picking Gary Wilbers to be on the task force to implement the restructure, because he was the single largest opponent to this. He thought it was the stupidest idea in the world, and everybody listened to Gary in those days. And so once he came on board and he saw the value in it, in the restructure, we pretty much had the support we needed. Not because of you and I, because they didn't know us that well, and they certainly didn't trust me because I was an outsider. But once Gary started saying, hey, we ought to do this, then people started lining up. And then the irony of that, we were going to do it over a 3-year period. We were going to do a third of them the first year, a third the next, and third. Well, after the first year, all of them wanted to be restructured. They wanted it right away. So they actually wanted it quicker than what we wanted to do.
I think the biggest the secret to our success on this was, as you said, we went around all areas. And we sat with the people, we invited in coaches and parents and athletes and anybody that wanted to come. And as we told them, we're not here to ask you if we can do this. We're here to tell you that we're going to do this, but we want you to understand why we're going to do this. That this isn't just something off the top of our head, that we put a lot of thought into this, and if just stick with this, this is going to work, and it's going to make a better organization. Because things had to change. The way things were going, there wasn't going to be a Special Olympics in Missouri.
Well, the first 6 months, I didn't know how we were going to make payroll. I mean, I really did not know how we'd make payroll. And we only had 5 people, and now we've got 41. So it was a real challenge. I do think that one of the things that we had to do that I think was really important is we did have a few individuals who really believed that Missouri Special Olympics, as we knew it then, was going to fold if they weren't involved, because the world revolved around them. And without them involved, the whole thing was going to go in the tank. And we politely suggested to them that they would probably prosper in another organization. And interestingly enough, they were wrong.
Yeah. I think the hardest thing, at least for me when we went through this, is we had, this 16, or I think it was 16 areas.
18 areas.
And we had people that were in charge of these areas that had been there for years. And it worked, had a job and then did this, as a volunteer. And all of a sudden, we're going to tell these people, no longer are you going to be in charge of this. And I remember in one particular area, this woman, sit there and said to me, do you understand I've done this for 20 years, and now you're telling me I can't be an area director? And I said, no, you can be an area director. We'll be glad to hire you. I'd love to have you on. Well, she said, but what are you paying? And we told her what the salary was, and she said, well, I make $10,000 more than that as a teacher or nurse or whatever she was. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but, that's what we can afford to pay right now. And I said to her, and I remember the tears run down her face, and she said, you're a hard-hearted so-and-so. And I said, well, I'm sorry you feel that way, but I said, if we don't do this, there's not going to be a Special Olympics, and we need you to stay on and help us. And she didn't for a while, but then a few years later,
she came back.
At one of the events, she came up and said, I'm sorry I said what I did, because she said, this is what we needed.
Well, we're paying them $18,000 a year, full time.
Yeah, big money.
Yeah.
Well, of course, first of all, I'd like to say thank you. I'd like to say thank you for coming to Missouri under the conditions that you came. And I realize if it wouldn't have been for a family situation, we never would have had Mark Musso. I know that. But we did. We got him, and oh my, am I thankful that he came to Missouri. If you look back to where our offices used to be, I can remember an office down, I think it was at William Keeper's or something. I was the board chair then. I'd go to see Mark, and when you couldn't find him because there was boxes piled in the hallway, and you'd holler Mark, and he'd holler Ralph, and you just follow the sound, and that was the only way you could find him. But you take it from that to the next step to where we're at here today, and my goodness, my friends, you've brought us a long, long way. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. Thank you. I think most importantly is that we never ever forgot that it's about the athletes, and anyone that didn't show that they were about the athletes, we knew they weren't going to last in the organization, whether it was on staff, whether it was a board member or a key volunteer. If they truly didn't show to us that they were about the athletes, we probably didn't make them feel welcome. I don't know that the organization would make them feel welcome. So I think it was always about the athletes. I think in terms of what Colonel Biele did is he looked strategically at how we could make this organization better. And your plan to do the restructure There are two things about Special Olympics Missouri that I believe will make it one of the best programs during the 50th anniversary for SOMO, and that is you started the torch run. Obviously, there's nothing that's funded more than the torch run in terms of revenue support. And secondly was the restructure and the willingness to go outside and hire somebody from the outside. And had we not done the restructure, I really believe we would have never grown to where we are today. The reality is we had 5,000 athletes in those days, unlike the 22,000 that you promoted. Because if somebody had, went to 3 practices in one state event, that was 4 persons. So we did away with that. I think one of the other highlights is we really focused on financial integrity. We really wanted to show our donors and show our staff and show our board that we were all about financial integrity. And then as these charity watchdog groups started, it was important to us to prove to the donors that your money's going to go to a good place. I believe the relationship between our staff and our board is exceptional. I think it's as good as probably any program in Special Olympics movement. I think that's a tribute to both the staff and the board members. It's not a one-way street there. We've had outstanding relationships, and I think one of the reasons that we've had that, and one of the highlights for me of the years, is that any time either one of those groups, either the staff or the board, got out of their lane, they were put back in their lane. And it didn't happen very often, but we made sure. And for me personally, was just the relationships with the 15 board members that I had the opportunity to work with. I was really, really blessed to have those 15 different bosses throughout the years, and I learned so much from them. For me, it was clearly a highlight. And lastly, I would say the biggest highlight for me, other than the obvious of working with athletes throughout actually 3 different states in my career, was I was so proud of the fact that our staff tenure averaged about 10 years. And we always were between 8 and 10 years. And that doesn't happen by accident. That happens by creating a culture that people want to work there, that they're rewarded. They work very, very hard, but they also can play very hard as well. And I think that was important to me.
Yeah, and you mentioned staff, and I think it's important to say that so I'm very proud of you and all you've done. But the first thing you did was put together a good staff. And of all the accolades that you've had, without this staff, you wouldn't have had
Absolutely.
these. A leader is no better than his staff. And goodness, we have a great staff. And I'd put our staff up against anybody.
Yeah.
They're fantastic people.
Well, I think the board should be complimented here in 2019 that they selected a staff member to become the next president, the only staff member that I inherited when I got here that I kept, frankly, in terms of the headquarters staff. So the board, when we look at some of the things that go on in other Special Olympics programs, we shouldn't take for granted the continuity that we have both on staff and on the board. And another thing about the board that I think the reason why our board is so good is that we always have at least 2 past board chairs on our board at all times, and they have that institutional knowledge. And as a result of that, we don't make those same great mistakes over again. We make plenty of mistakes, but we try to make them only once.
Yeah, and it took us 27 and a half years to be here, but I think that's important that we didn't try to do it all at one time. We took it step by step by step, and sometimes that's hard to do. You want to get to the end, but we took our time and we did it right.
Well, and I think that one of the other things that we've done is we've tried to make sure that our staff is available to serve on national and international committees, and I've always welcomed that. A lot of my colleagues think that's not a good idea because you're liable to lose a staff member to another program. I always thought that we benefited as SOMO more than they benefited from our participation.
The most important thing was that we took this plan and Mark took it and ran with it. He could see what needed to be done and he made changes and so forth. And I'm just thrilled at what's happened in 27 and a half years. If you wanted to write a story, you wanted to write a book, what a happy ending you'd have to the book. And again, thank you for bringing us along that 27 and a half years and for counting the athletes correct.
Yeah, well, you say what an ending, and my ending is the beginning of something really special here, and I think we've laid a foundation that with the Training for Life campus that we can do things at Special Olympics Missouri no other program can do in the world. And I'm confident with the team that we have now, with the staff that we have now and the board leadership that we have now, they're going to do things that we can't even imagine. And all the more reason why you and I shouldn't be involved, because then they can do the things that they get, that they understand that we don't. You know, I hear people say once in a while that he doesn't get it, you know, and I have to chuckle about that. You know, you're talking to somebody who, when he was 15 years old, went to a track meet that was called a retarded track meet, and nobody wanted to do anything with these athletes other than put them into institutions. And so when somebody says to me, he doesn't get it, I just have to chuckle, because I think you have no clue how far we've come and how far we'll go. And I guess I really look forward to the day that, you know, Missouri announces that their next president and CEO was a former Special Olympics athlete. And I'm absolutely convinced that'll happen. It'll happen. There's no doubt in my mind it'll happen. It may not be the next CEO or the one after that, but there will be a CEO in the future that was a participant in this program. And I think the reason it'll happen in Missouri is because of the fact that we understand it. You know, it's about the athletes. When it's all said and done, all the things that we did don't matter near as much about the fact that if it's in the best interest of the athletes, it's going to be in the best interest of the organization.
And the one thing that we haven't mentioned too much about, and I think really needs to be brought out, and that's a thank you to the law enforcement community for what they have done and jumped in. This run started out strictly as a small run from Columbia to Jeff City. And as you just said, I think that's where it would have stayed if it wouldn't have been for the athletes. I think once these police officers started coming to games and giving medals and really got involved more than just raising money, they were hooked. And again, it's the athletes that gave them the incentive to do this. And that's a great story in itself, how this thing is growing to bringing in the amount of money that it does today. But again, it's the athletes that breaks their heart, that just makes them love them, and they're willing to get out and do whatever it takes to try to help them and raise money for them.
Well, and I just want to say, Ralph, thank you for the opportunity to come and be a part of this. You sold me on there'd be crappie fishing involved too, though. I remember that during the interviews, that if I came to Missouri that we'd be doing crappie fishing. It took you 20 years to invite me crappie fishing. I haven't forgotten that either, just so you know.
Well.
And so I said I'd stay 3 years, but it took 20 for you to say, hey, you want to go fishing?
Well, because I went trout fishing with you one time and saw the type of fisherman you were, and wasn't really too sure that I wanted to get involved with you on the crappie land.
I see.
But out of the goodness of my heart, I have taken you, and I brought you a long way.
Yeah, you sure have, yeah. I think the last thing that I'd like to say about what I've learned from the athletes here in Missouri, we were celebrating the 25th anniversary of Fort Leonard Wood. You'll remember this. 25 years we were at Fort Leonard Wood. And we had a big opening ceremony planned that night. We had fireworks, just the greatest fireworks show ever. We had everybody imaginable there. The patrol probably had the helicopter, as I recall, going to be a part of that. And it came a storm to end all storms. And we were at the VIP reception. And I remember having to call opening ceremonies. And I was so upset that on the 25th anniversary that we had to call opening ceremonies. You remember that?
Yes, I do.
And I was moping around and I was sad and just thought this is terrible for the athletes. And, you know, I can't believe this happened. And the next day I ran into Jamie Graham. And it said, Jamie, I'm really sorry about last night. And he said, what do you mean? What are you sorry about? I said, about the fact that we had to cancel, and I'm so sorry about the weather. And he looked me right in the eye, put his arm around me and said, Mark, the good Lord gave us 24 straight years of good weather. One ain't bad. You know? And that's really, it puts it all into perspective.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Mark, there's some great quotes out there, but I think there's one that really says it all. It says, success is not the key to happiness. Happiness is the key to success. If you love what you're doing, you will be successful. That's Albert Schweitzer that quote came from. One of the things I think really it sticks out is you've always had that emphasis on the athletes. So if you don't mind, I know there's many stories, and I don't like just picking out one, but we don't have time to give them all. Share 2 or 3 stories of athlete stories that just stick into your mind.
Oh man, we could use up all the tape on that. That's for sure. I think you know, one of the funniest stories is when I was coaching Special Olympics in Wichita, and loading up the softball team to go to Winfield to the state tournament, and it was just me, and I got them all loaded into a 15-passenger van, which we don't use anymore because we can't, and got them all loaded up, and I put my seatbelt on and ready to take off, and I hear the door open up, and I look over, and Billy Cook is running away. And had to stop the van and go chase him down. Took about 30 minutes to find him, get him back in the van. I was smart enough to put him then in the back seat of the van, make all those people get out and put him back there where he couldn't get out. And what makes it such a funny story is not the fact that he ran away, because he ran a lot, is that when I got back in the van and I put my seatbelt on, I looked up in the rearview mirror and I looked at him. I said, "Billy, what are we going to do with you, man?" And one of the other little athletes, our shortstop, Stevie's sitting in his seat, and he goes, "Let's put him in a pot and cook him." And so all weekend long, as a coach, all I had to say to Billy was, "I'm getting that pot ready, buddy." And man, he did whatever I asked him to do. And I think the great thing about the athlete stories is everybody has their athlete stories, and some of them make you cry, some of them make you laugh, but the thing about the athlete stories is they're so pure, because that's what we learn from the athletes. And so rather than tell a lot of stories, I think what's important to me is just to tell people what you'll learn from the athletes. You'll learn that telling the truth in the long run is a lot easier. It's just easy. Telling somebody what you really think is easier, provided you're not offensive in that regard. Loving people, no matter who they are, and giving them a chance before they give you a reason not to trust them is what the athletes teach you. And I think probably what's most importantly is can't isn't really a word, I think, for most of our athletes. And the only reason that can't's ever been entered into that is when people outside of the athletes put it into a conversation. Well, athlete can't do that. Athlete can't work at Special Olympics Missouri. Athlete can't be the president of Special. Well, who says can? And I think when you say can't, our athletes are even more and more challenged to prove you wrong. So throughout the years, those have been some of the lessons that I've learned from the athletes.
Yeah, and I think they learn how to overcome those obstacles and barriers better than really some of us others, because we don't have those early on, and they've had those, and they just really realize that they're going to overcome those obstacles and barriers, and there's nothing that they can't do, as long as they don't have someone kind of setting up their mindset that it's negative. And that's why I think it's so important with our program.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. And I think what I've always said for years is Special Olympics really provides the platform for others to see the abilities of the people that are involved in our program, and to quit talking about the disabilities. I'm so glad that, I think back throughout the years, retarded, mentally retarded, persons with mental retardation, persons with intellectual disabilities, cognitive delays, delays, all the different terminology has all been really pretty negative. And so if you were labeled as can't or retarded or any kind of a lasso like that, you might give up, but they don't. And so to me, they just prove that you never give up and you don't let people drag you down.
Yeah. Well, and you and Ralph talked about this some, but one thing that's really been a highlight of myself since I've been involved with the program in 1994 is really seeing the people and seeing how great of staff that you've put together and you've assembled. And you say it many times in board meetings and everything that are in, and you know that it's not one person. But I'm curious for you to share with some of those either staff memories or just the staff in itself as they continue to go forward. That really makes the difference in our program, because we do run Special Olympics like a business, because it is a business, but it's about taking care of the athletes, but it's really about the staff going forward. So what would you like to share with the staff about some of those memories, or be able to tell them?
Well, I think, in the early days, we did everything. Everybody did everything. So, in the early days, your value as a staff member was established as whether or not you helped load the truck and unload the truck. I'm happy to say that we've gotten to a point now where there's enough people on staff that not everybody has to help load the truck. If so, we wouldn't be able to load the truck. We'd be in each other's way. I think one of the things that we've done with the staff is, first and foremost, is we've done a good job of hiring. And we try to hire people to get the mission, and try not to hire somebody that is just looking for a job. We try to create an environment with our staff that you're going to work very, very hard. You're going to work a lot of hours. But when you're off, we want you to be off. We want you to be away. We want you to enjoy your family. And then I think probably what's made our team such a great team, and unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, some of our staff members haven't had the opportunity to see this yet, is when you have a crisis in your family or at home or something going on, that's the most important thing. There's nothing at Special Olympics Missouri more important than what they need to do at home. And I think we've really made that a part of the culture. And when you need to be away, people are going to be there to support you, and people are going to be in your corner. You're going to feel that SO family. When somebody passes away or somebody's in the hospital or whatnot, they're going to hear from us. You're going to get something from Special Olympics Missouri. The family's going to see that we were thinking about you, because that's just too important. I've never, ever questioned how much money we spend on flowers or plants that we send when someone's passed away that's important in our program. I think another thing is that, all of our decisions can't be good decisions on hiring. And so I think throughout the years, we've done a pretty good job of realizing when we've tried them in different seats on the bus, and the reality is there isn't a seat on this bus for you, is saying to them, this isn't a bus for you, you need to go somewhere else. And I think when we recognize that it's not a decision about that individual, but it's a decision about what's in the best interest of the team, then we're willing to make those decisions. I don't know that we've ever regretted any of those decisions that we've made. I think we've gotten a lot better in the last few years of picking the right people in the first place. The other thing that we've gotten really good at is we don't have any problem at all moving people around on the bus. And I'm confident that Susan Stegman, as the new CEO, will be moving some people around on the bus. And that's such a great opportunity to learn new skills and have a different boss. And so I think that we've really done a good job of that. I think also, our board has been, and I'm not saying that to you because you're the current board chair, but our board's been exceptional. Our boards have been exceptional at taking care of the staff. I mean, our benefit package is outstanding. We've always said to every new staff member, if you're thinking about leaving, we're not going to give you more money. But if we can put you on a different seat on the bus, we'll do that. And so I think we've created a really good environment. We've had a great support. I mentioned earlier that the relationship between the board and staff is the best of any program in the movement. I'm absolutely convinced of that. But we've hired some really quality people. And I think the last thing that I would say is we learn if there's anybody that ever has time to question someone else on staff maybe isn't doing their job or they're not putting in the hours, the person who's questioned it has too much time on their hands. And we make that clear to them.
Well, it's kind of interesting because what I'm researching is a lot of culture right now and positive culture in workplaces. And this is in the business setting, but Harvard recently done a study, and there's a 756% increase in profits in a positive culture in a workplace. Now, this is in the for-the-profit world, but I still think some of those things apply. And what you talked about is in our setting in the organization of Special Olympics, why it's so important. The culture we create is really what attracts people and keeps them. And it doesn't matter if it's the athletes or if it's the staff or if it's a board member, volunteer, that's what attracts them. And if we remember that, we're going to be successful.
Oh, I totally agree. And I think, we talk a lot about the staff, but the reality is we're attracting some really quality board members now too. We really are. And obviously some Class A volunteers. One of the things that we're not great at is we're not great, I said we move people around on the bus, on the staff. We need to get to the level, or they need to get to the level, since I'm now retired, of looking at the same thing with Class A volunteers and key volunteers. Okay, so you've been doing track and field for 25 years. Why do we automatically plug you back in track and field? What do you want to do, and where would you best? And the same thing with the athletes. We shouldn't pigeonhole which sports they're in. Which sport do you want to be involved in? What do you want to do in athlete leadership? And I think that's the next step. We've proven on staff how you can do that, but we now need to do it on the board, with the volunteers, with the coaches, and with the athletes.
That's a good point. Well, one thing you've made very clear, and it came out when you and Ralph was talking about, that you've always been for the athletes. And I just think, as kind of that, you're going to still be involved, and I know you're going to be around the athletes some, but what would you want to tell the athletes out there that they're watching this from Mark Musso? What would you want to tell the athletes?
Well, I would say to remember that this is your organization. The rest of us are just along for the ride. And there is no one in this organization, the board chair or president of the organization, that's more important than the athletes. And I think the athletes need to know that with the athlete leadership programs that SOMO has now, and the job that the staff is doing on that is exceptional and probably one of the best in the movement. So the athletes have the opportunities now to talk about where they see this organization going. We need the athletes to continue to take more of a leadership role, and this is your organization, where do you want to see it go? I hope that the athletes know that with only a couple of exceptions in the past 27 and a half years here in Missouri, one time during cancer and one time during a family crisis, 110% from me every single day of my career. I never gave less than 110%. But I did that because when I coached athletes, they gave 110% at practice, in the games, and anything that they did. And so when I saw that as a volunteer coach, and I learned at a very early age, this is what the athletes do, it's one of the many lessons they taught me. If you're going to be into something, you better be into it 110%. And I can say that I have, I left it all out on the court. There's no doubt in that regard. And I feel good about that. I'm just a couple days into retirement, and I don't have any regrets about the effort that I put in.
Yeah, and the athletes the thing is, you bring such an inspiration to all of us. So that's the one thing I would tell the athletes is continue to bring that inspiration.
Yeah.
You make Special Olympics what it is. That's the reason I got hooked back in 1994. That's why everyone, when they tell their story, they remember when they kind of got hooked with the movement. And almost every time it's because of something that was involved with the athletes and how their first games they went to. And mine was a Fort Leonard Wood's game down in Fort Leonard Wood that you convinced me to go to. And I always thought I was too busy. And on the way down, I even said I shouldn't be going. But then once I became hooked and been involved with the organization ever since.
Yeah, I was going to point that out to you. I met you in 91. You got involved in 94.
A little slow.
So you either had a steep learning curve or you were too busy, and I think it was probably the latter. But then once you got involved, to your credit, you were a full speed ahead. Yeah. And then you chaired the capital campaign that built this Training for Life campus, so obviously it hooked you. You just made a comment there that I think is probably the future of SOMO, and I hope maybe the Special Olympics movement, is everybody telling their story more. Everybody has their SO story. My SO story started in Hutchinson, Kansas, at Gowan Stadium as a Key Club member working at that first track meet. Everybody has their Special Olympics story. And rather than us say, hey, you don't have a Special Olympics story, so we don't have a spot for you, we need to make sure you get a Special Olympics story. Come to an event, let us show you one. Yeah. And I think everybody needs to share their story. If you don't know how to start a conversation with somebody in the Special Olympics family, just say, Gary, what's your Special Olympics story? And then listen. Yeah. Because there's going to be a common thread there that once you're there, you're hooked, and it's because of the athletes.
Well, and the same thing that we have, our organization is really, the backbone is the coaches and the volunteers. So I think, as you're going out, that's another one. I kind of want you to just speak to that group. Number one, I know you're great at telling them thanks and making people feel good. But those coaches and volunteers, as we continue to grow, that is really what allows the movement to happen. You were just up in St. Joe this weekend, and I know those events doesn't happen unless we have those volunteers. But also it's those coaches that put in those hours of the coaching to allow our athletes to be able to train and compete and do their best. So what would you like to say to them?
Well, I'll start with, I think, the most important group of all, the coaches. Not only the most important group, but the most rewarding job, too. Let's be very clear. Whatever they put into it, they're getting double back, there's no doubt. And I think what I would say to the coaches is, I personally understand what you go through to make it all work, to pick up athletes, to take them to practice, find a place to practice, to fundraise, to fill out the paperwork, to do all the things you have to do to be a coach. And I want the coaches to know we appreciate that. We could not operate this organization throughout the world without those volunteer coaches, and we know they're the most important ones. I would also want the coaches to know the staff is just doing their job when they're asking to fill out certain forms and meet certain deadlines. They're not trying to just be the naysayer or the person, the Debbie Downer. They're just doing their job. So we all have the same goal in mind. We want a quality event for the athletes. Coaches have to do their job, staff has to do their job. So I guess what I would say to the coaches is we appreciate every minute you put in, but you can make us better if you will share with us the kinds of things we're asking you to do that are really, you feel like wasting your time, taking your time, so we can communicate about how we can make that better. So that'd be first of all. The volunteers, we as an organization, as SOMO, are not great at utilizing volunteers as much as we could. I think we're getting better, but I think we have a long ways to go. So we're always very quick to say how great we are at certain things. Let's be clear. We're not great at utilizing volunteers at all levels. There's a lot of room for improvement there. I think the board's starting to realize that you got to get people involved in the organization before you consider them for the board. We're doing a lot better job on that. I think the staff's beginning to realize that if you can get a games management team in a town that really wants to take the ball and plan it, let them do that. They may not do it exactly the way that you want them to do it, but as long as they do it and it's their flavor and they don't break any rules and nobody gets hurt, it's their thing, let them do that. So I would hope that the volunteers understand. I said this in a radio interview the other day, and I think it's something that everyone should remember. Wherever you are in Missouri, whatever time you have available, we've got something for you. It doesn't matter where you are, and it doesn't matter how much time you have. Whatever it is, tell us how much time you have, and then maybe we can help match up to meet your needs. And then lastly, I would say to the volunteers, if you haven't been a coach, work towards that. I mean, that's really victory lane. Being a coach is victory lane. All the other jobs are great, they're fun, but nothing holds a candle to being a coach in Special Olympics.
Yeah, and I just, from the board and from our organization, just want to tell the coaches and the volunteers, you are that backbone, and you're so crucial to what we do each and every time. Just want to say thank you, because number one, you see the athletes when they're competing. That's what allows them to do that. We can do the fundraising, we can do those type of things, but if we don't have those volunteers and those coaches helping those athletes, it doesn't happen. Just you really make the organization, so truly appreciate them to do that. Mark, kind of in the last areas, I kind of want to really let you kind of say, for our current, our future, kind of this is your area that I'll let you kind of go where you want to go with the interview, and tell us something that, you know, you think if somebody's watching this, what's something that really would matter to them that you want to share with them?
Well, I would hope that people understand that during my tenure as president, you know, while we're at an event, whatever the event is, it could be a polar plunge, it could be a state games, it could be a regional games, it could be a board meeting, it could be a leadership conference, it could be an Alps training. While we're still at the event, we're already thinking about how do we make this better next time. And some people would maybe even say to a fault. I mean, we can't even get in the car on the way home without already talking about how to make it better next time. We've gotten better about that. We have a single list that we call into the press box and say, hey, add this to the list so you don't have to worry about remembering it. I think if we could make that a part of our culture at all levels, we would be the premier program in the world year after year after year. But that starts with the athletes. How do you get better? Well, if you're not in Alps, maybe you ought to be in Alps. If you're in Alps, what can you do? What's the next step? If you're in the communications department, what can we do to make the communications department better? If you're on the board, what am I doing as a board? How can I become a better board member? What did I not do at the last board meeting? If I'm a coach, what am I not doing that I should be doing? Every time you do anything, whatever it is in the organization, think about how could we make that better. Along with that is being honest with one another, and when you fill out an evaluation, don't check that everything went right when you know it didn't. Tell us what didn't go well. So I think if we could make that a part of the culture throughout. You said earlier that we're pretty good at thanking volunteers. I would differ with you on that. I don't think we're great at that. Maybe, and you said we're pretty good. We're not great at that. I think that we can get better at that, but the best way for us to get better at that is volunteers tell us what could we do to make this a better experience for you. We know your interaction with the athletes is going to be great. We're not going to touch that. Well, what could we give you? Is there anything we could give you? What incentive can we give you to turn in your coach's hours? There's a good example. So, you know, I think communication both ways. It's not just staff to the field. We certainly don't do that, or board to the staff. We don't do that either. Every time we do something, how do we get better, and being honest with one another.
Well, that's the key, I think, really. And communication is key. In business, it's that way. In nonprofits, that's the key in all businesses. Is that really what makes you better? And the thing is, whenever you think you have that down, then you better recheck, because you better do it again, because that's when communication starts to slip. So I think that's so interesting. Well, Mark, from behalf of myself as current board chair, to Ralph Biele that you got the interview with and kind of talked to about the starting days, I can't say enough to say just thank you for what you've done for the last 27 and a half years. And I think the biggest key to this is really, I wrote this down and I shared this before, and I want to really I hope when you reflect, and I know you've started doing some reflecting, on how different the world is today because of people like you. Because you got to think, you've dedicated your life to that change and to work with people with intellectual disabilities and with our athletes. And yes, you succeeded in that. And I hope you always remember that, because you've made a difference. And really, in our life, when we check off boxes at the end of it, shouldn't we really ask, did we make that difference? And I think you've made that difference, my friend.
Well, thank you, Gary. That means a lot coming from you. It's you pretty much summarize what my goal is every day, is make a difference in somebody's life, and a positive difference, because I can also make a negative difference. But I've tried to do that every day, not only when I'm at work, but just in my life. And I think what's important to note is that while there's a lot of accolades coming my way, as Colonel Biele said earlier, it's about the staff team that we put together. The current staff, past staff, people that we've had, the board staff relationship, the volunteers, the coaches. I think what's most important is that how it's changed my life dramatically. It's formed my life for all intents and purposes. My life has been Special Olympics. And we need to remember how impactful that can be on anybody that's involved in our program. You don't have to be the president and CEO for that to be impactful. You're a pretty good example of that too. When I tease you about it took you 3 years to get involved. And look how your entire family, your kids, your wife, they're all involved in Special Olympics, and they don't know anything else. They've been polar plunging since we allowed them to polar plunge. And they come and they volunteer at the games. Look at how much it's changed your life. So rest assured it's done the same for me. And you know, what happened here in Missouri is really something pretty special. And I'm just excited that I got to be part of the ride, because you know, while I get a lot of credit for a lot of things, I certainly am not the reason that it happened.
Athletes, coaches, volunteers, I'm going to leave you with one last quote. Mahatma Gandhi, he said, "Be the change you want to see in the world." And that's really what we're talking about here, be the change. Thank you for joining us for this, and just Mark, thank you so much. And I hope you enjoyed this segment of really learning about a history, but learning about what makes Special Olympics so special right here in Missouri. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Gary. Thank you. Thank you, buddy.